Inside a restricted corridor of the Temple of Seti, Garwai at Abydos, far from the paths taken by regular tour groups, there exists a long wall covered in hieroglyphs that stretches nearly 4 meters at the height of an average standing person. The carvings are deep and precise, cut into clean white limestone. In the lower register, the section closest to the floor, there is a list that no published academic translation has ever fully addressed or explained in mainstream Egyptology. This is not the well-known Abydos king list that appears in every standard textbook. It is a different list on a different wall in a different part of the temple complex. In 1941, the respected Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan documented it during his detailed survey work. He described it as a pre-dynastic ruler list that he could not easily classify within the conventional historical framework. He photographed the panel, filed his notes, and continued with his broader work. Hassan passed away in 1961. The photograph and his accompanying survey records remained stored in the Cairo Museum archive for many decades afterward. When those markings are carefully read as the administrative document they clearly appear to be, they record 5 distinct groups that governed before the time of the historical pharaohs. 5 separate civilizations or administrations, each given a specific name, each described with associated territory, and each with a particular ending. These endings are not presented as symbolic or mythological metaphors. They are recorded in the same precise, matter-of-fact administrative language that ancient Egyptian scribes used for noting crop failures, flood damage, official deaths, and other practical government records. In the following detailed examination, we will explore who these 5 groups were according to the inscription, what the hieroglyphs specifically say about how each one ended, and why this particular panel has never been properly featured or discussed in any mainstream Egyptological publication or textbook. This is information that has been largely ignored or deliberately sidelined for a very long time. Stay with me until the very end, because what follows has the potential to completely change how you understand the deep history of human civilization on this planet. What makes this discovery particularly striking is that the panel does not exist in isolation. It connects to other important ancient sources. The Turin King List, a limestone tablet preserved in the Turin Museum in Italy under catalog number CAT-TIR 1874, contains parallel pre-dynastic ruler sequences that use the exact same 5 group designations found on the Abydos wall. The Palermo stone, a basalt slab held in Palermo, includes related notations that align with the same framework. These 3 independent sources, created from different materials, discovered in different locations, and produced across different centuries, cross-reference each other with remarkable consistency. The word used across all 3 sources for these pre-dynastic groups is Aku, which in Egyptian administrative texts means those who came before. It is the same term employed in legal documents to describe prior owners of inherited land, not mythical ghosts or supernatural entities, but real predecessors. All 3 sources describe the same basic sequence, 5 prior administrations. The Abydos wall goes further by detailing exactly how each one came to an end. The inscription begins with the first group, designated as the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. The hieroglyphic rendering includes a walking legs determinative, a small marker that indicates beings in motion, beings who travel rather than remain stationary. Their territory is described as the land at the edge of the Great Water, clearly coastal territory. Their ending uses the verb saf, meaning extinguished or wiped out, paired with the water marker that ancient scribes used for real bodies of moving water, such as the annual Nile flood or irrigation channels. According to the panel, the Shemsu were extinguished by water. Their coastal settlements were submerged. The geological record of the period before approximately 12,000 BCE documents events that match this description precisely. The Younger Dryas meltwater pulse involved a catastrophic rise in global sea levels caused by collapsing glacial ice sheets. This inundated coastal areas across northeast Africa and the Near East on a massive scale. Whatever the Shemsu built on low-lying coastal ground, the rising sea took it. The Abydos panel records this catastrophe with the same clinical brevity a modern insurance adjuster would use when documenting flood damage, property lost to water, administration ended. But the inscription continues without pause. The second group is designated the Neru, the ordered ones, those who follow law and structured governance. Their determinative is the seated figure with a staff, the standard marker for authority, administration, and those who hold and enforce order. They are not portrayed as supernatural divine beings, but as practical administrators and organizers. Their territory is described as elevated ground above the floodplain. Their ending uses a verb that appears in context of ground movement, enta, repelled or rejected by the earth itself. The ground became hostile. The land they stood on shifted beneath them. Seismic events documented in the geological record of northeast Africa during the prehistoric period occurred at scales capable of rendering entire settled zones uninhabitable through processes like liquefaction, where saturated soil loses structural integrity during earthquakes and temporarily behaves like fluid. Solid ground becomes moving ground, Buildings sink, foundations fail. The Neru's elevated territory ultimately rejected them. The Abydos panel records this mechanism in a single precise verb. What follows in the second register becomes even more intriguing. The third group carries the most detailed entry on the entire panel. They are designated the Majat, the recorders, those who set down the count. Their determinative is the scroll marker, the same symbol used throughout Egyptian administrative texts for written records, archives, and the act of documentation. The Majat kept records. The hieroglyphic description of their civilization uses a phrase that translates as those who held the count of all things, and then adds a notation that Selim Hassan's survey described as unusual in its construction. It specifies what happened to those records when the Majat ended. The records were carried forward by those who followed. The Majat's knowledge archive survived their civilization. It was inherited. This single notation fundamentally changes the picture of why Egyptian writing, mathematics, and astronomy appear fully formed and sophisticated at the dawn of the first dynasty. They were not invented from nothing. They were received and carried forward from the Majat by whoever came after them. The atmospheric ending of the Majat also connects logically to the Shemsu flooding event. The Younger Dryas period included not only catastrophic coastal flooding, but also major atmospheric disruption from volcanic activity. Multiple large eruptions injected sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, triggering sharp temperature collapses. A civilization dependent on specific atmospheric equilibrium would have found its survival parameters eliminated within a generation. The Shemsu coastal flooding and the Majat atmospheric rejection may represent two consequences of the same broader cascade of events. Two civilizations, two different endings, one shared geological period of profound disruption. The fourth group on the panel is designated the Akhet Keru, those of the horizon sound, or those who spoke from the boundary. Their determinative combines the horizon glyph with the mouth glyph, associating them with both the edge of the visible world and the act of speaking or proclaiming. Their territory is described as the boundary zone, neither fully highland nor coastal, but the transitional land between. Their ending is not marked by sudden catastrophe. It is perhaps the most chilling entry on the entire panel precisely because of what it lacks. The verb used is hem, to diminish, to become less, to decrease gradually. The Akhet Keru did not end in violence or disaster. They declined slowly. Their numbers fell. Their territory contracted. The final notation on their entry uses a phrase meaning they were absorbed, taken into whatever came around them. Not destroyed, not exterminated, outnumbered and gradually incorporated. This demographic ending has a strong resonance with a pattern in the archaeological record that researchers have identified but never fully explained. The transition from the pre-dynastic period to the first dynasty in Egypt is marked by what archaeologists call a cultural discontinuity, a period in which material culture, burial practices, and artistic conventions change rapidly in ways that do not follow a smooth evolutionary line. Something replaced something else, not through obvious conquest. There is little evidence of the violent destruction of pre-dynastic settlements at the scale a military takeover would leave. The replacement appears demographic and cultural. One set of practices stops appearing. Another begins. This is exactly what the Abydos panel describes for the Akhet Keru. They diminished. They were absorbed, not fought, not wiped out, replaced demographically by something that grew around them until they were gone. The cultural discontinuity in the pre-dynastic record is the archaeological signature of a demographic transition that the Abydos panel recorded in a single verb more than 3,000 years ago. The five endings taken together form a clear sequence that moves from catastrophic to subtle to voluntary. Water, ground, atmosphere, demographics, withdrawal, each mechanism less violent than the last. As if each successive civilization had learned something from what ended the one before it, had become better adapted to the physical dangers, had developed greater resilience to flood, earthquake, and atmospheric collapse until the fifth one faced none of those environmental threats and chose to leave anyway. They withdrew deliberately to a location the panel calls the first place, where the count began. Whatever that place is, wherever it lies, the carver of the Abydos panel knew it well enough to name it, and we cannot yet identify it with certainty. The Abydos wall does not explain it further, and nothing else in the surviving Egyptian record does either. What the standard translations and interpretations leave out is how precisely the physical and geological record confirms the first three endings. In 2012, a major study published in Quaternary Science Reviews by Dr. Peter Clark at Oregon State University documented catastrophic coastal inundation events in Northeast Africa between 14,000 and 9,000 years ago. Events that would have eliminated any low-lying coastal civilization in those regions, leaving almost no recoverable trace. The scale of what the sea erased in that period is not speculative. It is preserved in the sediment record. The Shemsu ending is in the sediment record. In 2017, a joint team from Cairo University and the German Archaeological Institute conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Giza Plateau. The survey detected geometrically regular subsurface anomalies at depths between 4 and 12 meters beneath the Sphinx enclosure. The boundaries were too precise to be natural geological formations. The survey was published. The permit to excavate those anomalies was denied. The anomalies are still there. The permit is still denied. Whatever physical evidence of these pre-dynastic administrations survives beneath the plateau has not been entered. The Cairo Museum Archive, which holds Selim Hassan's original photographs of the Abydos panel, has restricted access to that specific survey file since 2003. Patterns of restricted access and suppression extend across multiple historical moments. Around 1336 BCE, after Akhenaten's death, the priests of Amun systematically chiseled his name rings from monuments across Egypt. Akhenaten had referenced the Shemsu in his own inscriptions as the source of the plateau's construction knowledge. After his death, references to the pre-dynastic civilizations as real predecessors were removed from the public record. In the 4th and 5th centuries CE, Coptic Christian communities destroyed Egyptian temple archives. Those archives held the translation traditions that allowed the pre-dynastic sections to be understood as administrative records rather than pure mythology. When the archives burned, the ability to read the panel correctly burned with them. Napoleon's 1798 expedition produced the Description de l'Egypte, but certain plates showing internal shaft and corridor inscriptions were removed from later editions. During Zahi Hawass's tenure-controlling excavation permits, projects exploring pre-dynastic evidence faced repeated delays or blocks. The Zep Tepi withdrawal is the detail that makes the entire panel function as something more than a simple disaster record. 4 of the 5 entries describe tragedies, civilizations erased by forces beyond their control. The 5th is different in kind. The Zep Tepi are not described as victims. Their entry carries no marker of loss, no verb of destruction. The verb is neutral and purposeful. They withdrew. The administrative language of the panel treats this withdrawal with the same clinical tone as the other endings. A succession list does not mourn, it records. And what it records for the Zep Tepi is a deliberate departure to a named destination. A destination that the scribe who carved this panel knew well enough to name. The panel is still in the corridor at Abydos. Hassan's photographs are still in the Cairo Museum Archive. The subsurface anomalies beneath the Sphinx remain unexcavated. The permits are still denied. And the question the 5th entry leaves open, where did the Zep Tepi go and are they still there, is carved into a wall that nobody with a full publication budget has been allowed to document thoroughly since 1941. The Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and the temples at Abydos continue to stand as silent witnesses. The inscriptions remain, the evidence waits. And the story of what came before the pharaohs may be far older, far more complex, and far more important than the official timeline has ever allowed.